Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. This week's Parsha, friends, is Parashat Yitro. And this week's Parsha begins by giving us a glimpse of Moses, the man, and the roots of his greatness. It reminds us that God didn't choose blindly when picking Moses. Why? Because it shows us that after putting his life on the line twice, the first by killing the Egyptian slave master only to be insulted by his own people, and the second to save his future wife, it tells us the root of his greatness. Gershom, that although he was a stranger in a foreign land, Eliezer, God was still his helper and even saved him from the sword of Pharaoh. And note that he named his children before the Exodus. So you're probably asking, why did he believe back then? He saw no miracles. The sea didn't split for him like it split for you. And this also goes for our patriarchs. We don't see them doing good because of some future reward or punishment or because of miracles. And friends, this is exactly what made them great, because they did choose willingly, fully to do the right thing just for the sake of doing the right thing. In other words, for the sake of order and justice, to the point that the Almighty explicitly tells us that justice we should also pursue. And this leads us to the first, and I think the most important principle found in this whole Parsha, which is the key to progress, my friends, both in the religious realm and any other realm. And what's that? The idea of doing a lot with a little. And this, my friends, is something that not only Christians but Jews have abandoned. Instead of doing a lot with a little, we're doing a little with a lot. How? Friends, every century the siddur gets longer. Every year the library grows thicker. And what's the result? Are we religiously better off now? Friends, a lot with a little. And honestly, I don't think that the Parsha could have set it up any better before it mentioned Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, who only after hearing about what the God of Israel did for Moses and the people of Israel in Egypt did he become a believer. It states that because of what he heard, he believed and worshipped the Almighty. And that's all it took, my friends. And friends, I don't believe that this is here by accident. In other words, we just read in the last few Parshas how Israel needed miracles and wonders to believe. But Yitro, he did a lot with a little. And I must ask you today, in what area of your life have you ethically bought low and then sold high, where you've perhaps been in a situation you felt was undervalued, but with the right cultivation you could make it blossom? And friends, what really makes Jethro impressive is that Jethro was not a Hebrew. He had no axe to grind, but yet he says, now I know that God is the true God. And note that till then, he saw no great miracle in his life. And how do you know that my message today is true, my friends? How do you know? Because this is what God is doing with us. And this is what he's doing with Israel in this Parsha. He's buying low and cashing in when the time is right. Which is why Chazal teaches that after this, Yitro converted to Judaism and merited to have this Parsha named after him because of his great wisdom, which is why I believe the Torah is laying down the definition of biblical wisdom right here through the example of Yitro, teaching us that true wisdom is when someone can learn by barely hearing what happened to others. In other words, they don't have to experience it themselves. They don't have to learn it the hard way. This is what the Torah is trying to cultivate in us through the example of these patient, righteous men. Because, friends, all history needs is just a few of them. Good men, to the point that after Yitro sacrifices and meditates to the Almighty, he shares the principle we just explained to Moshe Rabbeinu. And what's that? That the only way he is going to be effective in leading and judging his people is if he delegates some of the responsibility on other God-fearing men. Again, doing a lot with a little. And Jethro here is reminding us that repairing the world is a team effort, and the only way to make an impact is to multiply our efforts through others so that you can maximize your return. And what did Moses do? He took his father's advice. He didn't say, you're not a Hebrew, or what tribe do you belong to? And this is what awarded Moses the attribute of humility. And this is also how we can become humble, by not letting our egos get in the way, but rather by doing and choosing the right thing just because it's the right thing and not because its messenger has some pure pedigree. And later in the Torah, we'll see that this is what the Almighty also had in mind. And this is also what makes these men great, my friends, because they think like God. Like the Almighty says of King David, that he was a man after his own heart. In other words, always having the progress of goodness in mind, to the point that this system culminated with the rise of the Beit Din HaGadol, and we can even see some sparks left in our generation with our rabbinical leaders who sole purpose is also to keep us progressing in holiness. And we see that not only did the Almighty endorse Yitro's idea, but rather he's going to take it a step further. He's going to show the greatest act of mercy in human history. He's physically going to solidify the standards of goodness once and for all so that the world could finally improve. In other words, he's going to give us his instructions so that we won't have the daunting task of doing what our patriarchs did in the past. And what's that? Of trying to decipher God's will from the world around us. And this, friends, is the greatest love story in human history, that God loved us so much that he gave us a holy standard to aspire to. But again, friends, with such love and such mercy comes much responsibility. And all this is what's described in this week's Parsha, friends. But if anyone began the narrative here, they would have thought, who is this God who demands anything from these poor people? So that's why the Almighty tells Moses to remind the people, I am the one who brought you out of your bondage in Egypt. As the Parsha states, how I carried you on eagle's wings. Remind them on how I loved them so, to the point that the people understood, and even before even hearing the first command, they said, we will do everything he commands. Why? Because he didn't bring us this far and tolerated so much just to have us fail. So you today, if you're feeling low, but you know that you've been walking in the ways of God, don't give up, because he didn't bring you this far so that you can quit now. And this, my friends, is one of the major principles explained in this Parsha, that true love cannot exist without order and conditions. That's why the Almighty himself states that only if you keep my commands, then you will be my Am Segula, my treasured people. You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So in other words, if we don't, we won't. To the point that he even begins the first of the 10 statements by reminding us again how he took us out of Egypt. Why? So that if sheer desire is not enough to help you to do good, perhaps love would be. And friends, within these 10 principles were contained all the ethical mitzvot that the 613 are based on. 5 mishpatim and 5 hukim said out loud for all the children of Israel to hear, so that no one will later say that Moses made it up. And that's why you and I are here today, because not only did this event happen, but those instructions work, my friends, and are as applicable today as they ever would have been. And friends, if you're interested in learning more about Torah Judaism, please visit bejewish.org. And if you're interested in converting to Judaism, becoming a descendant of Israel yourself, please visit Torah Judaism International at torahjudaism.org. Thank you.